Yes, it did. This is an exciting day, and this is the final day, obviously, of the conference. And I'm sure your next presenter, Jim Marrs, his reputation precedes him, and I say that affectionately. I did want to mention that his new DVD, which is on the secret of Redgate, a documentary on the sightings of a small Montana town over the past 50 years, is available, and we are still trying to work out the details on when it will be shown today, but we're working very hard to be sure that it can be shown and it's available for you to view. And Jim is very excited about that, and he can talk more about that to you and tell you what the details are and why you should see it. In today's presentation, he's going to be talking about exopolitics and secret societies, ruling by secrecy. There's always been some very powerful financial interests in secret societies. It's quite possible that both candidates in the upcoming election will be members of the secret society known as Skull and Bones. And Jim will talk about whether or not this is a good idea. You may have a feeling how he feels about that. From 1947 to the present day, a new player took the field, the Secret Empire, the intelligence wing of the military-industrial complex. And Jim is the author of bestsellers Crossfire, Alien Agenda, and Rule by Secrecy. He's written about it all, and he'll bring a new perspective to the connection between secrecy, extraterrestrial related phenomena, and the wealthy elite. That would not be us. So, beginning with a documented UFO crash that predates the Wright brothers through the development of the Nazi flying saucers to President Kennedy's UFO connections, Jim Marrs will weave together these fascinating topics, and he will connect the dots for us. Jim has lectured all over the world. He's famous for being able to bring humor to the darkest of subjects. And we need Jim Marrs.
Well, I do. Oh my God. All right, I'll leave it alone. All right, can everybody hear me all right? Thank you. Okay, we got a long way to go in a short time to get there. And in fact, I feel like the fellow that says, hey, you got a minute? Tell me all you know. So without further ado, let's just rush on through some of this stuff. I do have lots of information. As Cheryl said, I am going to try to take what heretofore is thought to be two separate research communities. You got the UFO community over here, and then you got people that are looking into the New World Order and the secret societies over here, and we'll see if we can't show that we're actually talking about the same ball of wax. Just to get you orientated this morning. Okay? The universe is a big place, and when you really look at it, we're kind of out in the boondocks here, okay? So let's don't get any delusions of grandeur. You know, we tend to have the idea that we're the apex of God's creation, but actually I think we just came down from the trees not too many years ago. Okay, common theme all over the world, flight. All right, from the ancient Syrians to the flying Vamas of the Hindus to the dragon chariots of the Chinese, on and on and on. Where'd that come from? Is that just a natural human thing, or is this a conscious memory of technology in the past? Well, of course, in recent years, we know that it's obviously a phenomenon that's here with us at this point in time with the advent of the camcorder, with people getting pictures every day. Come on, folks. Is there anybody left that doesn't realize that there's something going on in the skies over our head? And, of course, there are a lot of people who are in lockdown. You know, they don't want to hear about this because it disturbs their little natural world paradigm. But you folks are not among them, so let's move along. We get stuff like this. Who knows? Can you fake a picture like this? Yes, you can, but they're from all over the world. Here's Fort Worth, my hometown in Texas, and just kind of right up the road there is a little place called Aurora, Texas, okay? And the story is that one morning on April the 16th, 1897, A silver cigar-shaped object floated in, kept drawing closer and closer to the ground, finally hit a windmill tower on Judge Proctor's property and exploded into pieces. And the newspaper story said the pilot, whose remains were badly mangled, but enough were recovered to show that he was not an inhabitant of this world. Okay? Now, you've all heard all the arguments against UFOs. Well, it's just, secret government test craft. No, and misidentified aircraft, et cetera, et cetera. And I always thought, wouldn't it be nice if we had a really documented sighting before all that stuff was in the air? Well, here it is, folks. 7 years before the Wright brothers flew, 7 years before the California Arrow, which was the United States' first powered balloon ever lifted off, you've got Aurora, Texas. Now, the debunkers all the years, the story, by the way, is down here where it says a windmill demolished it. This is the entire front page of the Dallas Morning News for April the 19th. Took a couple of days for the news to get there, but it was not only in the Dallas News, it was also in the Fort Worth papers. And the debunkers can't get away from that, okay? Because the stories are in the paper, and they're on the front page, and they're not done in any kind of humorous, satirical manner. It's straight reporting. So their argument has been, well, it was just a hoax story planted in the newspaper to draw attention to the little town because it was dying on the vine because the railroad bypassed it. Well, I heard that for many years, and that makes some sense, so I was certainly open to that until you get the entire front page. There are 16 stories on the front page of this Dallas Morning News. Every single one of them concerned the flying object, the great aerial wanderer, okay? And, of course, this was the tail end of the great airship mystery of 1896 and 1897. And, by the way, my favorite story is unfortunately off the screen here, but it comes from Granbury, Texas, which is south of Fort Worth. And it said the Flying Jenny, of which we have heard so much lately, came over town last night about 9:30. And while Newt Grisham was drilling the Riddle rifles, whatever that was, I guess it was the local militia, it said Newt, being a warsome young man and a populist, couldn't stand the sight of the machine, so he ordered the company to open fire, and they did, and soon the whole town was aroused. Now, I'm often asked, why don't they just land and say, here we are, we're friends, now we know why. What is that, Newt? I don't know, shoot it. Here was the Little Tombstone, and it's been marked with chalk, but I assure you this is what was etched on the tombstone, and it seems to only actually be half the tombstone. And you have this little V-shaped thing and with the three little circles that look like little portholes, and that appeared in the Dallas News in 1973. When the stories, Bill Case, who was then aviation writer for the Dallas Times-Herald, wrote some stories, and I did too for the Star-Telegram. And since the stories appeared, there was a big commotion. A lot of people went up there to look around. They actually placed a police guard on the cemetery for a couple of weeks. The very night that they pulled the police guard, that tombstone went missing, and it's not been seen since. I can also tell you that from people, I live very, very close to here. I'm about 5 miles from Aurora. And I can tell you from talking to people that go to my church and people who live around there that government agents have been encountered in the Aurora Cemetery in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s. One man told me he was over there with his metal detector in the 80s, and he ran across some guys that were with the government, and his quote was, he said, their metal detectors made my metal detector look like a toy. But anyway, so this is the story of Aurora, fully documented, published in the papers at the time, and it was not a hoax. Another picture of the cemetery and of the Little Tombstone before it went missing. We've got people like Mary Evans, who was there at the time and said, yes, it happened. Charlie Stevens says, yes, it happened, but the key thing is that these stories of this silver cigar-shaped object flying around and landing, they were stories of interaction with the crew, and this is really fascinating because in one instance, they said, the common thread when they had contact with the crew of this thing was, don't tell anybody about this, okay? In one story, they said, we developed this at a secret laboratory in New York State, and we just thought we'd take it out for a spin, and we had such success that the next thing we knew, we were over Kansas. And now we're here in Texas. But don't say anything because we're going to patent this, and it's going to revolutionize transportation. That was one story. But the story I think I liked the best was a track inspector who encountered this thing and the little crew. And they said, don't say anything about this. We're on our way on a secret mission for the government to bomb Havana. Okay? And now what's interesting about that to me is that the Spanish-American War didn't start for another year. And that was only after the battleship Maine blew up, supposedly a terrorist act that nobody could anticipate. Okay? Sound familiar? And these guys are already talking about bombing Havana. I think obviously they knew something we didn't know. Now, you've got the great air raid over Los Angeles, which has been very seldom looked at too, and it was covered in the papers. They exploded over several thousand rounds of ammunition when the newly developed radar spotted these craft coming in off the West Coast, heading towards Los Angeles. They put up the searchlights, and all night long they were banging away. You can see the searchlights are obviously centered on something, and you see the little bright spots. Those are anti-aircraft shells going off. At the time, they said this is all very real, but the next day, the War Department superseded everything, and Secretary of War Stimson said, oh, no, it's just war jitters, and there wasn't anything there. You can see the photograph, and if you look closely, it does look like there's something in their searchlights, but when you do it to the reverse, you can actually see the shape. And you've got a saucer-shaped object that was floating in over the city. Better yet, we now have government documents that says that they recovered unconventional aircraft off the coast of California and in the San Bernardino Mountains east of Los Angeles also recovered a similar craft that cannot be identified as conventional aircraft. Hello? They were starting to recover stuff in 1942. What I really find interesting is the bottom thing that says you got George Marshall, Chief of Staff, and he says, I've further ordered an investigation of War Department files regarding unconventional aerial reported since 1897. So they knew about the Aurora spaceship crash too. So don't think it all started with Roswell. Of course, you had the, kind of jumped through there, but you had the Foo Fighters. There was a story out of the New York Times, 1944. They all thought it was the Nazis' newest war device. Interestingly, after the war, the Japanese and the Germans all said, well, we thought it was your secret weapon, and so obviously it didn't belong to any of the combatants. And then we talk about saucers of the Third Reich. It is historic fact that when the Allies overran Germany, they had on the drawing boards flying saucers. And here's the, I believe this is the Shriver saucer. And you notice it doesn't have any jets on it. This thing, they were already experimenting with electromagnetic forces, and they were really far ahead of anything we had. And the question is, where did they get that? Then, of course, what really got it going was in the June of 1947 when Kenneth Arnold saw these craft flying over Mount Rainier. And, of course, we're all familiar with the Roswell case where they said the Roswell Army Airfield captures a flying saucer. And, of course, the next day, General Ramey says, oh, no, it was just a weather balloon. And, of course, now they've changed their story 4 times. It was a top-secret mobile balloon. Actually, it was crash dummies, And, by the way, have you all ever considered this? When the Pentagon holds a news conference, as they did in the summer of 1997, and they say, it was just crash dummies at Roswell, and then showed us documentation from the late 50s and even the 60s. I remember watching that, and I think the bottom line of that came during the question and answer period when one of the few astute news people there said, Colonel Johnson said, you're telling us that they saw crash dummies in 1947, but everything you're showing us looks like it's from the 50s and the 60s. And Colonel Johnson said, and this is a quote, well, I really don't know what they saw in 1947. Okay? Thank you, Colonel Johnson. So what are you here for? What's this all about? It's to pacify the public. And you people being the choir that I'm preaching to, have you ever stopped to consider that when they come out and said it was crash dummies, and even in their own report, and I think I have this, here we go. They said they came out later, said it was a mogul balloon, and then they showed us this bit of debris and said, no, it's just a weather balloon. And then he says it's crash dummies. And do you really expect the only nuclear-equipped bomb group in the United States at that time obviously had some of our top military people there, including intelligence officers, and you're going to tell me they can mistake a human-sized dummy for a little alien? But the key to it is, in their own report, right up here at the top, like any government report, it's just chock full of details and statistics and numbers and everything else, and we find that the very first crash dummy test was in 1954. So by their own report, case closed, they tell us it can't be crash dummies, you know? Now think about it though. See, the government is the government of all of us, okay? Not only us who want disclosure, who want to know what's going on, but also the government of people who don't want to know what's going on, all right? And they've got an obligation to all of us. So when they get up and tell us it's crash dummies, and then in their own report tell us that the crash dummies test didn't start till 1954, it's like those of us who are aware go, holy crud, they're lying to us. That means it's real because they're covering up. But the people who can't accept it, who can't deal with it psychologically, they can go to bed at night, sleep peacefully, and say, well, the government said it was crash dummies, and then go back to sleep. This is actually it's a pretty smart way. They're kind of letting us know, yeah, it's real for those who are paying attention and thinking, and then the rest of them can say, well, it's crash dummies. All right, let's move right along. I'll tell you where a whole lot of our problems started was in 1947, National Security Act, okay? And by the way, that there had been a lot of talk prior to that about like combining the intelligence services or at least creating a central intelligence agency to coordinate it. There'd been a lot of talk about separating the Air Force from the Army. It'd been the Army Air Corps before that. And there was even some talk about trying to change the name of the old War Department, which kind of sounds belligerent and aggressive, to the Defense Department, which sounds a whole lot nicer, okay? But then think about it. Under the old War Department, we'd only had 3 wars, Spanish-American War and World War I and World War II. Under the Defense Department, I can't even begin to name them all. Kosovo, Grenada, Bosnia, you name it. And Iraq, Afghanistan. I think we ought to go back to the War Department, okay? There's a whole lot less fighting. So it created the Air Force, renamed the War Department, created the CIA, but the key thing, and that most people don't concentrate on, is it created the National Security Council. Now think about it. All these little undeclared wars and fights and skirmishes and things we get into, it's always the National Security Council that gives the authorization. But who is the National Security Council? Anybody know? Probably not. It's 4 people. It's the President, the Vice President, Secretary of State, and Secretary of Defense, 3 of whom are appointed or named by the President. This is unprecedented power in the presidency, okay? And obviously, just by the very name, if it's anything that smacks of national security, they're in charge of it, and that includes UFOs. And this is where they bypass the Constitution. They bypass Congress. They bypass the media, and they bypassed the public. And there's where the problem lies, folks. Not with our form of government, but with the way they have twisted it around over the years. Now, from that, we begin to get all of these documents, MJ-12, and I'm sure most of you all are familiar with that. The only one that I would point out is down number P down here, government policy of control and denial, okay? You didn't see it, and if you persist in saying you saw it, then you must be a nut. And it's really worked well. There's still people today who do not want to talk about it and who think there's really nothing to it because the government says there's nothing to it. We know about the operations manual. And, of course, there's a lot of controversy about some of these things, but that operational manual is Dr. Bob Wood, and I'm sure, and Ryan would tell you, they found out was, even though it's copies, they can't test the paper, but they can find out from the typeface that it was printed on a government printing press that has not been in use since the mid-50s. So if these documents and if this crash retrieval manual is a phony, then it's a phony that was done back in the 50s for some unknown and unspecified purpose. Most of them are just blacked out. The one on the crash at Roswell is extremely explicit, gives dates, everything else. LZ1, LZ2, this landing site, that has caused some problems too. Everybody keeps saying, no, it crashed here, no, it crashed over there. Truth seems to be it hit one place, left debris, and then sting, ricocheted off and landed somewhere else. We all know that even on this report, which is dated 1947, they said the first crash investigators from Roswell thought that Landing Zone 1 was the remains of an Army Air Force top-secret mogul balloon. But when scientists from Los Alamos Laboratory arrived, it became apparent to all concerned that what had crashed in the desert was something out of this world. Now, this is the one I like because of my interest in Kennedy. It became known to the counterintelligence that some of the recovery operation was shared with Representative John F. Kennedy, elected to Congress in '46, son of Joseph P. Kennedy, commissioner of the organization of the executive branch of the government. Kennedy had limited duty as a naval officer assigned to naval intelligence during the war. How many of y'all knew that John F. Kennedy was in naval intelligence? Not very many. But it's in this report dated 1947, and it's true. And it's believed that the information was obtained from a source in Congress close to the Secretary for the Air Force. So of all the people in Congress, John F. Kennedy was one of the few who knew that Roswell really happened. And therefore, when he became president, we've got these documents, such as in 1961, where it's a national security memorandum signed by Kennedy, like a brief summary from you, the review of MJ-12 intelligence operations. But the one I really like is that this one, to the Director of Central Intelligence, classification review of all UFO intelligence files affecting national security. And it says, I discussed with you previously, I've initiated and have instructed James Webb, who is head of NASA, to develop a program with the Soviet Union in joint space and lunar exploration. It'd be helpful if you would have the high threat cases reviewed with the purpose of identification of bona fide as well as classified CIA and USAF sources. It's important we make a clear distinction between the knowns and the unknowns in the event the Soviets try to mistake our extended cooperation as a cover for intelligence gathering of their defense and space program, and it's dated November the 12th, 1963. Now, this is one of the documents that does not have any absolute provenance, and yet it looks totally legit, and nobody has really come up with anything saying it's not. Here's a document, National Security Action Memorandum 271, to the administrator for NASA, and he says, I want you to assume personally initiative and central responsibility for the development of a program of substantive cooperation with the Soviet Union in the field of outer space, and it's dated November the 12th. Obviously, that's what he was working on that day. And, you know, that's a story in itself. Who would have thought in the fall of 1963 that we would be going into joint space exploration with the Soviets? That was the height of the Cold War. Now, we've got further stories from Glenn Pace and Rufus Bond, who worked at Area 51. Now, they had no access to to unconventional aircraft or UFOs, but they did have access to the dining room where all the German scientists would come and eat. And they tell the story that they were all upset because President Kennedy was coming to visit Area 51. But they weren't too concerned because they said they were basically, it's like, we'll give him the usual song and dance and tell him there's nothing here and he'll go on his way. A few days later, after the visit, they were highly incensed because they said Kennedy was threatening to cut their budget. Why? Because he goes out there, got the usual spiel about nothing happening here, no aliens, no spacecraft, and he knew better. So he's threatened to cut their budget. We also know that in connection with that, Kennedy was having an affair with Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe was threatened to spill secrets. And among the secrets that she was caught on an FBI wiretap talking about was that Kennedy had gone to a secret Air Force base and viewed things from space. And the conversation was between one of Marilyn Monroe's friends in Hollywood and the famed reporter Dorothy Kilgallen. Now, you'd think Dorothy Kilgallen with things from space, what are you talking about? But no, according to the transcript, she says, oh, yes, I know all about that. And she did, because here's a story dated 1955 where she quotes a cabinet-level minister in Britain who says that, that UFOs are real and they come from another planet. It's all there, folks. It's all just scattered here, there, and everywhere. The problem is everybody wants the major media to tell them, yes, here it is. It's really real. Here's a press release from the White House, and that ain't going to happen. Now, of course, we know about the crop circles. I'm sure there may be even some of the programs here go into the crop circles, and we know, yes, there are many hoaxed crop circles, okay? But there's also many that are not. And the way you tell the difference is real simple. If human agencies have gone into a field and mashed down the crop to make a crop circle, then the stalks of the wheat or the barley or whatever it is are crushed, they're mashed down, they die, and pretty soon the crop circle is dead. In the true crop circles, there is cellular damage internally, as if from intense heat the crop lays over. It will not stand up, but it does not die. It just grows horizontally. That's how you can tell. It's real simple, but the news media can't seem to snap to that. You know, it's all Doug and Dave as far as they're concerned. This also goes way back. Here's the mowing devil from back in the 1700s. So this is not a new phenomenon. One of my favorites here is this. I think there's 140-something circles in a crop circle right across the highway from Stonehenge. In fact, they all tend to be very close to what are known as sacred sites. Actually, I think I have them figured out. They're just intergalactic corporate logos. Wear Friesel tennis shoes or whatever. Okay. Now we know. Now we know who's really doing this, okay? Unfortunately, this is a fake one, okay? You can see how ragged it looks and somebody's mashed it all down, but that's pretty interesting. This one, however, 2002, with an alien face and a little message that says, beware of deceivers, it is not so easy to write off. This one has the crop laying over. I haven't checked up on this recently, but to the best of my knowledge, this is considered to be a legitimate crop circle. And as you can see, they're getting more intricate and they're getting more telling. Now, so what's going on here? You know, or are we just now being visited? No, there's stuff all through history. Here's ancient artifacts, a stone axe that's in rock that was dated back like 10, 20,000 years ago, some sort of handprint in rock. The Baghdad battery, if you put the copper inside, put a little grape juice in there, you get a half volt of electricity. We got the crystal skulls. We got the Piri-Reis maps, which showed the exact perfect outline of the coast of Antarctica, which has been under ice for 7,000 years. So they had aerial maps 7,000 years ago. You got the perfect round balls of Guatemala. How they make that with just a hammer and a chisel, you know, so that we've got all of this evidence. And these are what science calls anomalies, okay, which is a highfalutin word meaning we don't know what the heck it is or where it came from or how it got here. But they're here, and that's why they don't like to talk about these things. But there's obviously something going on, and it's been going on for centuries. Oops. So that leads us to the rule by secrecy. Well, then who's in charge, and why aren't we being told about all this stuff, and why isn't there a concerted effort to find out where did all these artifacts come from and what is flying through our skies? People have tried to tell us, okay, and I'm not going to read all these old quotes, but this is one of my favorites. Woodrow Wilson, who was part of that ruling elite, part of that, he was the originator of the New World Order when he created the League of Nations, which the only reason it didn't work was because the Senate of the United States says, I don't think we're ready to give up our national sovereignty just yet. But obviously today we are. Some of the biggest men in the United States are afraid of somebody. They're afraid of something. They know there's a power somewhere, so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive that they'd better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. That's pretty straightforward, isn't it? And here's other quotes that you can read from the New York mayor and Franklin Roosevelt. They know. They know. I mean, they're there. They're part of it, you know. Conspiracy theorist, there you go. It's only the people out on the street who, you know, watch CNN and read the New York Times and they think they're well informed. And they go, oh, pish-posh. No such thing as conspiracies. You know, it's somebody's telling me the other day that they heard eminent commentators talking about the fact that Lincoln was not killed by a conspiracy. What? They hung 15 people. How can you say there wasn't a conspiracy? But that's the mindset. Now, we're back into it. We got the Trilateral Commission founded in 1973 by David Rockefeller, headed by Zbigniew Brzezinski, and all of the original members were members of the more secretive Council on Foreign Relations. So we know that, and look at the stylized swastika. I mean the logo of the Trilateral Commission, and so it's fair to say that this is just a little more open offshoot of the Council on Foreign Relations. The reason they committed or found the Trilateral was to bring in the Trilateral nations, bring in the Asian economies. And of course, as I said, that was just an offshoot of the old CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations. It was founded in 1921 after it seemed that the League of Nations was not going to work. And so they decided, and this was their avowed purpose, to convince the American people that we needed to go into this global society, okay? What I find interesting is here's the CFR logo, and here is an ancient coin with the logo of the ancient Knights Templars. Notice how it's pretty much the same thing, and they are the same thing because they track back. The people who founded the Council on Foreign Relations were all Illuminized Freemasons and members of Cecil Rhodes's Round Table, another secret society, and they were all came out of the ranks of Freemasonry, the world's largest secret society, and the Freemasons claim that they can trace their origins all the way back to the Knights Templars. The Knights Templars, but I get ahead of myself. All of this was consolidated. John J. McCloy, coordinator of information for the U.S. government, created the framework resulting in the Office of Strategic Services. And following the National Security Act of 47, the OSS, Central Intelligence, became the CIA, immune to all civil and criminal laws. And in the 1950s, the first director of the CIA was Walter Beadle Smith, who is named as MJ-12. And they helped create, along with their European allies, the group known as the Bilderbergers. They're so secretive that they don't even have a name. They're called Bilderbergers because they were first discovered meeting at the Bilderberg Hotel in Holland, and they were headed by Prince Barnhard of the Netherlands, who had been a Nazi SS officer. Then you track them all back to Hitler, who was put into power by the Thule-Gesellschaft, or the Thule Society, okay, who said that the gods in ancient times had come from the sky and given men all this knowledge and had separated the humans into these 7 groups, the best of which, of course, was the Aryans, okay? And that's where he got his Aryan philosophy. World War I, you go all the way back to there, and you find that the same people were running World War I on both sides. For us, we had a fellow by the name of Paul Warburg, who had immigrated from Germany, who was a member of the first Federal Reserve Board, one of the fellows that met on Jekyll Island to create the Federal Reserve, which, again, totally against the wishes of the public, totally against the things that happened for 100 years. They finally installed a central bank in the United States. I know for all of my life, you never heard it referred to as the central bank. But within the past 5 or 10 years, all of a sudden, even in the major news, they'll say, the central bank today, blah, blah, blah. That was one of the biggest bones of contention of the founders of this country, was whether or not we needed or wanted a central bank. And when they tried it, first with the old United States Bank and then the Bank of America, it was a disaster. And the little guy got hurt and the rich guys looted the country. And that's when Andrew Jackson shut it all down. And from that point on, we did not have a central bank. But we got one now, and nobody got to vote on it, okay? And Paul Warburg was the guy who was very instrumental in pushing this through. Warburgs, of course, the family had been neighbors and close friends to the Rothschilds, and they knew banking. Now, back to World War I. Paul Warburg is handling all the bond sales and all the financing for America for World War I, while in Germany, his brother, Max Warburg, was selling all the war bonds and building all the money for Germany's war effort. That's kind of cozy, isn't it? Same families, same group, all through history. These are the same people that created communism. People back in 1911 understood that. Here's a cartoon from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and we've got J.P. Morgan and George Perkins, his partner, Teddy Roosevelt, John Ryan of National City Bank, John D. Rockefeller, and the Carnegies, and they're all shaking hands with Karl Marx because they knew that Wall Street had financed and created communism. In fact, it was Max Warburg, who was not only head of the German Central Bank, but also a ranking member in German intelligence, who was part of the effort to get Lenin through Germany in wartime and into Russia so they could stop the war. Trotsky, the ideological leader of the communists, was in America when the revolution broke out. And he was financed by Wall Streeters, such as Jacob Schiff, and given millions of dollars and a ship and a boatload of revolutionaries, and they set off for Russia to create the communist government there so they could have a balance of power. When they got to Canada, the Canadian authorities stopped them and said, wait a minute, we're not going to let you go over there because you have publicly avowed that you're going to pull Russia out of the war. That's going to free up millions of German soldiers, and they're going to come over to the Western Front and kill our guys. Sounds reasonable to me, but the Canadian authorities were overridden by the British Admiralty and by President Wilson, who personally authorized a passport for Trotsky and sent him on over to Russia to create communism, the boogaboo of the 20th century. What's going on, folks? It's just a deal. And all of this comes back to Freemasonry. Here's George Washington in his Freemason apron. Freemasons founded this country. And they knew that the doctrines of the old Illuminati had been brought over in the ranks of Freemason. In a letter in 1782, George Washington said, it's not my intention to doubt the doctrines of the Illuminati and not spread the United States. On the contrary, no one is more fully satisfied of this fact than I am. The Illuminati, of course, was founded by Adam Weishaupt in Germany, was outlawed in Germany, and then Germany tried to get the other nations to outlaw it because he said these people are treasonous, they're traitors, they are going to try to subvert every constitutional government, they're going to try to subvert monarchy, and they're going to subvert religion. So we find now that there's a whole power structure here, starting with us at the bottom, coming up through the mass media and then to the intelligence agencies, multinational corporations, and the banks. Then you get into the secretive societies, the Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations. Above them are even more secret societies, such as Skull and Bones, Bilderbergers, Knights of Malta. Above them is the Illuminati, or some people call it the Committee of 300. And the question, of course, is who's above them? Oh, boy. All right, we got to hurry. Well, let's just keep going then. It all goes back through the Knights Templars. You can see that they brought back architecture from the Middle East. They brought back stained glass that even today modern scientists cannot tell us how they managed to make such this illuminated stained glass. You go all the way back and you look at the similarities between the Egyptian goddesses and carvings in a 9th century Jewish palace. And of course, it all goes back to Sumeria with the ancient Sumerian Tablets, which I talked about some yesterday in my talk, so we'll skim on through this. You notice that the names change, but the characters and the personality are all the same. We find the story of Noah is actually a story that was repeated in the Sumerian Tablets, only the name is changed. Instead of Noah, it's Upnarpishkin. We even now are wondering if Moses was not a name but a title. And there's a considerable number of prominent and credible people who believe that Moses was actually Akhenaten, the Pharaoh who fell out of favor because he worshiped one God. And we can see the parallels between Akhenaten and Moses. And we also know that the secrets and the knowledge that came from Mesopotamia, came from the Sumerian Empire, was transferred to Egypt first by Abraham and later by Moses. And we've also seen that immigration of Western civilization starts in the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, moves northward through the Caucasus, on over to the Celts. Everybody's into Celtic music and Celtic stuff right now. They didn't originate in the British Isles. They immigrated there from the Caucasus region. It all stemmed from there. Went to Egypt, then to Greece, then to Rome, up into France. It's all the same thing, and this knowledge was passed along, bits and pieces of it from a previous civilization. A lot of it was housed in Solomon's temple. Well, what happened to the fabulous treasure that they had, of not only of gold and silver, but of knowledge? The Jewish revolt, the Romans sacked it, took a good portion of it back to Rome. 400 years later, Alaric the Goth comes and sacks Rome, and he takes the treasure and takes it back to southern France, right along this way. Then the Knights Templars, that's where the knowledge came in southern France and with aristocratic French families that there was a treasure still hidden under the temple in Jerusalem. So they fomented the Crusades, and they got over there and formed the Knights Templar, and they got the rest of the treasure. And they took it back to France, and that is the basis of the mystery of Rennes-le-Château. Father Seigneur managed to find documents that showed that the treasure was in that location, and that's why everybody flocked to him, and that's why he got rich. By the way, Rennes-le-Château forms the westernmost apex of the old ancient temple of Isis. What happened to the treasure? March 1944, Otto Skorzeny moves into southern France with a battalion of SS troopers. They go to the area of Rennes-le-Château and Monsignor, and on March the 16th, he sends a one-word telegram back to Berlin. Eureka! Found it. So the Nazis got Solomon's treasure with the knowledge and the wealth. Is that where the flying saucers came from? It certainly is where they took it back to Berchtesgaden, headed in all the tunnel systems there, and then instituted, as the war began to wind down, Action Adlerflug, Operation Eagle Flight. They took all flight capital. They took all this wealth out of Germany, and this is the biggest secret of the 20th century. We beat the Germans. We didn't beat the Nazis. We just forced them to move, and they came over here. And here's how they set it up. They had U.S. corporations that were on the Nazi payroll, the German corporations, the connecting banks, and I would direct you to the Union Banking Corporation. In late 1942, one of the directors of Union Banking Corporation was prosecuted under the Trading with the Enemies Act for being nothing but a financial frontman for Hitler and the Nazis. That was Prescott Bush. Okay? Now, how come you don't hear a lot about that, and how come they didn't do more to him? Because Prescott was pretty smart. He was pretty smart. In the summer of 1942, he helped found the USO, United Service Organization. Now, who's going to prosecute the guy that formed the USO in the middle of wartime? So much we could talk about. You can see the direct links between all of these secret societies where the secret knowledge came from. This leads us to the question of, are the ancient Sumerian tablets telling us the truth when they say that these guys, the Anunnaki, came from space and colonized the earth? Well, there's only two possibilities. If they were here, they either all left or they all stayed, or at least a portion of them stayed on. How do we answer that? We can. You look at the historical record. If they all left, there should be nothing in the historical record except just the slow evolution of mankind. But that's not what we find, is it? We find saucers and all kinds of stuff, the occult practices. We find sightings, abductions. We find the Ezekiel, you know. So obviously they're still here. So, and we also see now that there's a small handful of people who've been trying to run this world ever since time immemorial. So there's three possibilities there. The people who are trying to run the world are either trying to contact these ancient creators, or two, they've already contacted the ancient creators and are being guided or controlled by them, or three, they are the ancient creators. Picture yourself as Charlton Heston on the Planet of the Apes. You don't want to just be one of the apes, you want to run the place. But you can't physically control 6 billion apes. The only way you can do that is through deceit and secrecy. And if you want more details, you can find them in my book. Thank you very much. Hope that gives you some ideas.
Please stay for a moment. Don't go. Don't leave. Don't leave. Jim is fabulous. Hang on now, just a second. I got a couple announcements. By the way, any speakers in this room, learn PowerPoint and learn how to do it like Jim does it. He's got it down. I have been incredibly remiss. A lot of things have slipped through the cracks. One of those things was Creative Enterprises on an arrangement with Xcon. It's been in here audio taping all of the lectures and making dupes. I think they're like $8 or $9, and I haven't even mentioned them, and this is obscene. They have got a lot of copies of a lot of the things out there right now, and they're now set up in the hallway right out to the left. So I think $8 or $9 a tape. So you need to know this, and I ask their forgiveness for that. We are trying to get as many of the videotapes done and DVDs, but we did not have the staff to do this, so we're not going to be able to have as many as we wanted. Ted Rain, who has done an unbelievable job, has also had to handle so much of the filming at the same time he's duping dozens of presentations and trying to set those up. But there are some there. They're going to be at the registration desk. Drop in there and pick up forms. We'll be advertising through the net extensively how to get access to these things later on. It won't be a problem through Lost Arts Media. I also like to announce another change in the schedule. Phil Corso was moved to 11:30 and then to 11 in Ballroom B workshop. Bill Burns is going to actually combine. So it's going to be the Phil and Bill show. They're going to be both together in Ballroom B. This is very unusual, okay? Phil Corso Jr. and the co-author of his father's book are going to present the workshop together, so there won't be any workshop in the Crystal Ballroom at 11. Just go there. It's a great opportunity. And let's see, have I left anything else? Oh, yeah, and the other vendors, some of which you came from Florida and California, please visit that vendor room, which is right there at the end of the hall. And I'm telling you, buy that X conference shirt, T-shirt. It's going to be worth huge bucks in just a short amount of time. Thank you. Bye.